Static crackles through the void, somewhere between sleep and waking, between the living world and what lies beneath. UV found the frequency. The dial trembles at 108.3 FM, a bandwidth that shouldn't exist. I am Damien T.A.O. Tonight, I bring you two tales that share the same poison, the kind that seeps into your spine when you realize some doors, once opened, can never be locked again. Our first story begins in a convenience store, one of those fluorescent-lit coffins that stays open 24 hours, bleeding artificial light into streets that should be dark. The location, somewhere so remote that even daylight feels like trespassing. Chen Jiryuan, let's call him Marcus Chen, had just graduated college with a degree worth less than the paper it was printed on. So he took the graveyard shift at this store. The owner told him the place had to stay open around the clock. No exceptions. Marcus didn't ask why. He needed the paycheck more than he needed answers. The first few months passed without incident. Nights were dead, no customers. Just Marcus and a sagging couch where he'd drift off, always waking with his skin prickling from an unexplainable cold. Then came the night that changed everything. Around 1 a.m., the door chime rang, a sound that shouldn't exist when no living person walks the streets. Marcus jolted awake. Through sleep-crusted eyes, he saw her, a young woman in a white dress, skin like porcelain that had never seen sunlight. Beautiful. Yes, too beautiful. Like a ventriloquist's dummy given flesh, the movements too smooth, the smile too wide, the silence too heavy. She didn't greet him, just drifted to the shelves and began selecting items with fingers that never quite touched the products. Coffee, chocolate, fish balls, high-calorie foods for someone who looked like they'd never eaten in their life. Marcus, still foggy with sleep, made the mistake of speaking. Eating all that this late? Aren't you worried about gaining weight? The instant the words left his mouth, he wanted to swallow them back, but she just smiled again. That smile that was a fraction too wide. "It is okay," she said, voice like wind through a cracked window. "I just got off work. I'm hungry." "You work nearby?" Marcus asked, forcing conversation to fill the silence that felt like drowning. "What do you do working this late?" "Just moved here. I work at the factory nearby." Her answer came too quickly, like a script memorized centuries ago. Marcus's brain snagged on that. There was no factory within 5 miles. He knew because he'd walked every inch of this wasteland looking for better jobs. But he swallowed his suspicion. She paid cash that felt too cold to the touch and left. The door chime sang her departure, and Marcus was alone again, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. Morning came. His manager arrived to count the register and went rigid. From the cash drawer, he pulled out a rectangle of paper spirit currency, the kind you burn for the dead, wiring funds to the bank of hell. The manager's face went the color of old concrete. He said nothing, just pocketed the ghost money and turned away, but not before Marcus saw his hands shake. Marcus, curiosity gnawing at him, asked, "Is there really a factory around here?" The manager looked up slowly. His eyes held something Marcus had never seen before. Not anger, but warning, fear for someone else. "No factory, son. Why do you ask?" "A girl came in last night, said she works at one nearby. Really pretty, just pale." The manager's expression went from warning to resignation. "Marcus," he said, and it was the first time he'd used his first name. "Pretty girls who wander alone at 1 a.m. Those aren't tea for guys like us to mess with. Just do your job. Keep your head down." The words landed like stones in dark water. Marcus wanted to ask more. What did he mean? Not for us. But the manager's face had closed like a tomb door, and Marcus knew better than to pry it open. She came back the next night, and the night after, always around the same time, always buying the same items, always paying with cash that left frost on Marcus's fingers. They began to talk, if you could call it that. She smiled at him. He smiled back. He told himself this was normal, that she was just a quiet girl with an odd schedule. But normal girls don't make the air smell like cemetery flowers. Every morning, the manager found more spirit money, 3 bills. 5-7, like she was paying her tab to the afterlife in advance. His face grew more haggard with each passing day. Then came the night she arrived earlier than usual. Her skin had gone from porcelain to alabaster, the white of bone china, of things pulled from cold earth. Sweat beaded her forehead, raw and glistening. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, genuine concern overriding his unease. She touched her temples, fingers pressing into skin that seemed too thin. "Cold, I think. Maybe sick." She bought twice as much that night. Bags upon bags of food for someone who looked like she'd stopped eating weeks ago. "Can you help me carry these home?" Her voice was fading like a radio losing signal. "I live close by." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't supposed to leave the store unattended, but she looked genuinely ill, and his shift was dead anyway. What harm could it do? So he locked the door first mistake and followed her into the night second mistake. She led him through alleys that seemed to narrow the further they went. Buildings decayed around them like rotting teeth. Paint peeled in great leprous sheets. The smell intensified that funeral flower sweetness mixed with something underneath. Something spoiling. How much further? Marcus's voice sounded small, swallowed by the dark. She didn't answer, just kept walking, her white dress a ghost light ahead. They stopped before a condemned building. Windows gaped like screaming mouths. Glass long since shattered. The structure leaned slightly, as if considering whether to collapse or not. "You live here." The words escaped before Marcus could stop them. She turned, and in the moonlight he saw her smile had changed. Still wide, still beautiful, but now he could see it was painted on. Fixed, like a mask that couldn't come off. "Conditions aren't great, I know." She pushed open a door that shouldn't have moved, hinges screaming, "Come inside." Marcus followed. Last mistake. The air inside was suffocating, that sweetness so thick it coated his throat. He could barely see his hand in front of his face. "Can you turn on the lights? I can't see." His voice echoed wrong, bouncing back at angles that defied the space. And then from the darkness, a pair of hands, ice cold, corpse cold, cemetery cold, wrapped around him from behind. Marcus's body locked. His heart stopped, then started again, slamming against his ribs like it wanted out. The hands were freezing, leaching all warmth from his body, and he realized with horror she was behind him, but he'd been watching her walk ahead. Then the pain came, not from outside, but from within, like something inside him was being torn apart, unraveled, replaced. He tried to scream, but his throat wouldn't work. Laughter echoed through the darkness, high and sharp, nothing like her gentle voice. This was the sound of rusted metal scraping bone, of triumph in taking what wasn't hers. "I've been so cold for so long," the thing wearing her voice whispered against his ear. "But you're warm, living. I think I'll wear you for a while." Marcus felt himself being pushed down into a corner of his own mind. The thing that had been the girl was crawling into him, filling the space where his soul used to be, like water filling a drowning man's lungs. His last conscious thought was of his mother, and how she'd never know what happened to her son. Then he was gone, and something else was looking out through his eyes. The next morning, Marcus showed up for his shift on time. The manager took one look at him and knew, you can always tell when someone's piloting a borrowed body. The movements are too careful, like a child learning to walk. But what could he do? Call the police and say his employee had been possessed. They'd throw him in a psychiatric ward. So he said nothing, just watched as the thing wearing Marcus's face smiled too wide and restocked the shelves with mechanical precision. The girl never came back to the store. She didn't need to. She'd found what she wanted, a warm body, a life to steal. And Marcus was screaming in the dark places of his own skull, a prisoner forever. That is how it goes with hungry ghosts. They find the lonely ones, the isolated ones, the ones who follow a pretty face into the dark. And by the time you realize what is happening, you're already wearing someone else's skin. Now let me tell you about Lin Yue. We'll call her Rachel Lin. She was a nurse, fresh out of school, working night shifts at a hospital that had seen more death than most cities. Hospitals are interesting places. The living and the dead share corridors there, separated only by the thinnest of veils. And sometimes, that veil tears. Rachel had just finished her rounds checking vitals, administering meds, the usual midnight dance of beeping machines and labored breathing. She was heading to the break room when nature called. The bathroom was at the end of the ward, isolated. The kind of place that feels wrong even in daylight. At 2 a.m., it felt like stepping into a crypt. Rachel pushed open the door. The lights inside were dimmer than they should be, flickering with an arrhythmic pulse that made her headache worse. She stepped up to the sink to wash her hands. That is when she saw her, in the mirror's reflection, a woman in a red dress standing at the far sink, applying makeup with slow, deliberate movements. Rachel's hands froze under the running water. Something was wrong. The woman's skin was white, not pale, but white like paper, like something drained of all blood. And her movements, they were off. Too smooth, like watching someone mime being human. The woman didn't acknowledge Rachel, just kept applying lipstick with a hand that trembled slightly, leaving a smear of red across lips that smiled even when her eyes didn't. Rachel wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and run, but she was paralyzed, watching in the mirror as the woman set down the lipstick and picked up powder, dabbing it onto cheeks that would never flush again. Then Rachel noticed something that made her blood turn to ice water. The back of the woman's head, where her hair parted. There was a depression, a concave wound, and from it, black liquid was seeping, running down her neck in viscous trails. Head trauma. Fatal. This woman's brain was leaking out, and she was putting on makeup like she had a date. Rachel's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The woman's eyes flicked up to the mirror, meeting Rachel's gaze. They were black, not dark brown black, like looking into empty sockets filled with void. "Do I look beautiful?" The woman's voice was wet, gurgling like speaking through a throat full of mud. A smile stretched across her face too wide, the corners of her mouth cracking. Rachel didn't answer, couldn't answer. Her vocal cords had stopped working, paralyzed by pure primal terror. "Samana's coming for me soon." The woman turned from the mirror, and Rachel saw the full extent of the damage. The back of her skull was caved in, a crater of bone and tissue, and that endless seeping black. "I want to look my best." Rachel's legs finally obeyed. She turned and ran like the hounds of hell were at her heels, crashed through the bathroom door, sprinted down the corridor. Her footsteps echoed like gunshots in the silence. She didn't stop until she reached the nurse's station, where her colleagues looked up in alarm. "Rachel, what is wrong?" She couldn't speak, just stood there shaking, her uniform soaked with cold sweat. They thought she'd seen a patient die. It happened sometimes, new nurses breaking down after their first code. They gave her water, told her to sit, said it would get easier. Rachel knew they didn't understand. Couldn't understand, because when she went back later, forced herself to go back, to prove she hadn't lost her mind, the bathroom was empty. No woman, no makeup, no black liquid pooling on the floor. Just the faint smell of cheap perfume hanging in the air. Sweet and cloying, the kind they use to mask the smell of decay. Rachel asked around the next day, casual questions dressed as small talk. Had anyone died recently? Any women? Any accidents? Her supervisor's face went carefully blank. "Why do you ask?" "No reason, just curious." The supervisor studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "A woman died 3 days ago, 7th floor, fell in her bathroom, cracked her skull on the sink. By the time they found her, she'd been dead for hours, bled out while putting on makeup." Rachel's hands went numb. What was she wearing? Why does that matter? Please, The supervisor's eyes narrowed, but she answered, "A red dress." They said she was getting ready to go out, had a date or something. Rachel's world tilted. The woman she'd been real, had been alive. But now she was dead, and death hadn't stopped her from keeping her appointment. She was going to meet someone, Rachel whispered. The supervisor nodded slowly. That is what they said. Her phone had a message. Someone was supposed to pick her up, but they never came. Or maybe they had come. Maybe death itself had arrived to collect her, and she'd wanted to look beautiful for the reaping. Rachel went home that night feeling like her skin didn't fit right. She kept seeing the woman's face in her peripheral vision, that fixed smile, those void eyes, that seeping wound. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that bathroom, watching dead hands apply makeup to a corpse's face. Her colleagues noticed the change. She jumped at shadows, refused to use certain bathrooms, kept looking over her shoulder like something was following her. "Rachel, you need to rest," they said. "You're working yourself sick." But rest wouldn't help. Because the problem wasn't exhaustion, it was sight. Something had opened in Rachel that night. A door in her mind that showed her things others couldn't see, or wouldn't see, or shouldn't see. She started seeing them everywhere. Shadows that lingered too long, figures standing in empty rooms. Patients who'd been dead for hours, but still sat in their beds waiting. The hospital was full of the dead. Had always been. She'd just been blind before. Rachel lasted 2 more weeks. 2 weeks of declining sanity, of jumping at every noise, of seeing things in mirrors that shouldn't be there. Then she walked into her supervisor's office and quit. Why? Her supervisor asked, though Rachel suspected she already knew. "I need to change this place. It is not good for me." Supervisor nodded, unsurprised. She'd seen this before. Nurses who suddenly couldn't work nights, who developed unexplained phobias, who left without explanation. The hospital chewed through them like meat through a grinder. Rachel cleaned out her locker and left. Never looked back. But the things she'd seen, those followed her, still follow her. Because once you've seen the dead walking, you can't unsee it. She tried everything. Went to a temple, burned incense, wore protective charms. It helped some. The sightings became less frequent, but they never stopped entirely. Now Rachel works an office job. 9 to 5 fluorescent lights and spreadsheets. Safe, normal, boring, exactly what she needs. But sometimes, when she is alone and the office is quiet, she'll see movement in her peripheral vision. A figure in red, a woman checking her makeup, always smiling, always watching. The incense burns low. Subscribe so you don't miss the warning when the spirits rise again. Sleep carefully.